Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Israel Ministry of Tourism and Traveling, I would like to welcome you all to this biblical seminar webinar. This event will last for approximately an hour, and we'll have 5 random questions at the end of the seminar. You can send in your questions via the webinar script, and we will randomly choose 5 questions that will be answered at the end of the lecture by Shahar. I would now like to introduce you to Josh Jones from Traveling to say a few words. Josh, if you can unmute your microphone, please.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Josh. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, a very warm welcome to you all from Traveling. It's been a real blessing and encouragement to have received such a positive response to our invite email. I'm sure today we're in for a real treat as we hear from Dr. Shilo about the new discoveries in relation to the location of the trial of Jesus. It's wonderful at a time when we cannot physically tour the Holy Land, we can instead receive a little golden nugget of wisdom. Let's remember that for Christians, when Jesus was put on trial, he stood in our place. Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 to 5 says this: "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." Because of the trial of Jesus, Jesus came under the condemnation of the law of God. And that really gets to the heart of why Jesus came into the world. I believe the trial of Jesus was the greatest miscarriage of justice the world has ever seen. But it was necessary for us believers to receive salvation through his death and resurrection. Jesus Messiah, a song written by Chris Tomlin, is one of my favorite worship songs. And in the opening lines, I really believe the words best describe the sacrifice Jesus made for us. Chris Tomlin says, "He became sin who knew no sin, that we might become his righteousness. He humbled himself and he carried the cross." That is love so amazing. I'd like to thank Ron Israel and the Israel Ministry of Tourism for setting up this Zoom webinar for us. And of course, Dr. Shahar Shilo for leading the presentation for us. May I kindly ask you all to mute your microphones if you haven't done so already. And now I'll hand you back over to Ron.
Thank you very much indeed, Josh. Much appreciated. I'd like to now introduce you to Shahar Shilo, ladies and gentlemen. Having gained his MA and History and PhD in Tourism and Marketing Management, Shahar was also head of the National Tour Guide course in Israel for 15 years. He continues to teach as a senior lecturer. A certified licensed tour guide, specializing in biblical history and archaeology, Shahar has guided groups in Israel for over 20 years and continues to lecture in Israel. Shahar has also conducted lectures at universities, organizations, and tour guide schools around the world. Today, it is Shahar Shilo's hope that those who attend his seminars will be enriched by the new archaeological discoveries in Israel that have brought the world of the Bible alive to the people of the 21st century. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shahar Shilo.
Thank you very much, Ron, for the kind words. And now I really have some high expectations to live up to, I understand. Well, it has been a long time that I've had the pleasure of wandering Jerusalem and soaring over it sometimes, and mainly going underneath as a researcher, because as you can tell, friends, much of Jesus' time Jerusalem is hidden from the eyes underworld and underground. And these are, underground worlds which are waiting almost anywhere in Jerusalem. I will focus today on some new findings related to the place of the trial of Jesus, which have been found in an amazing excavation took place under the very famous museum known to you as David's Citadel, or King David's Tower Museum. But Before that, thank you very much for the honor and privilege to present to you these kind of things. This is actually my 30th year in this career of tourism business and a historian teaching in universities and tour guide courses here and around the world many times. And it gives me much joy, I should say, because talking to people and especially getting questions, every time I get questions by the end of the webinars, and Ron and Sharon here are going to help, I believe, by the end of it to get some of your questions. It makes me, I have to go, I should say, it makes me go back to the books and look and search for answers, which sometimes either I did not know them, or it enlightens a new idea in my understanding of what we do here. So thank you very much for that. And if I may dive straight into where we are taking, I'm gonna just enlarge the presentation and show you where we are about. Actually, friends, the place I'm gonna take you into today in Jerusalem is a place known to everyone as David's Citadel. You're overlooking right now a beautiful fortress, but, and there's a big but here, because the few first minutes of my presentation will be actually dedicated to understand where we are and some geographical riddle, should I say a puzzle, which we need to solve together. And you need to understand, friends, this is a sensitive idea, because for generations upon generations, if I may be more accurate, I would say some 1900 years, people have come to this place, this area where I'm showing to you the David Citadel right now, allegedly as this was the biblical city of David. And what you're looking at right now is a Turkish prison and a Turkish fortress. When I say Turkish, the age is approximately, well, a little less than 500 years old. That's it. It certainly isn't from David's time, which is approximately 3,000 years old. And the reason is because of this understanding that I'm sharing with you right now. For nearly 2,000 years, Mount Zion and the area around it, which is Jaffa Gate, entrance to Jerusalem today, entrance to the old city of Jerusalem today, was considered by mistake. I'm saying this to be very much sure and confirmed. By mistake, this was considered as the biblical city of David. Now, if you ask yourselves, what was the mistake? Imagine you're taking a Lonely Planet, for instance. Imagine you're taking a Lonely Planet book or a Michelin guide or Fodor's, Frommer's, Blue Guide, Rough Guide, just name it. And you're taking it in your hand and it tells you that in order to see the beautiful piazzas of Rome, one needs to visit Glasgow in Scotland. This is approximately how large of a mistake this was, because for generations upon generations, people actually believed the books, and the books were wrong. How wrong? Let me be accurate, if I may. You're looking at a picture right now. Please look at the left bottom of the picture. At the left side of the picture at the bottom, you see the beautiful Dormition Abbey church, the Church of Dormition Abbey, which on the left side of the picture, you even see a small mosque next to the Tower Bell. If you are to look at the middle part of the picture right now, let me show you, these are the sites you see on the left side of the picture. You see the gray cone, beautiful church here. This is Dormition Abbey. And on the left side of it, where my mouse, my screen is now moving, you see the Tower Bell. This is actually Mount Zion. How come this was considered the city of David for such a long time? The answer, my friends, is very, very simple. Let me show it to you right now, if I may. Look at Jerusalem of the Second Temple period. This is the famous Jerusalem of King Herod. King Herod has built a magnificent city. I will quote some beautiful literature from the ancient times very soon. But before I do that, let me be very certain that you understand where we are right now. You see three white towers on the left side. These three white towers, 1, 2, 3 on the left side. These are the towers of the palace of King Herod. This is the palace. I'm showing it to you right now. The silhouette of the palace is all of this upper part in the upper west side of the city. This Here on the east side of the city, this is Temple Mount. You see the Antonia Fortress, the famous place of the, I would say, long understanding of where should station number 1 of the Via Dolorosa should be, the famous fortress of Antonia. I will challenge that with you today, if I may. It would be my pleasure to challenge that ancient perception that this was number 1 station of the Via Dolorosa, the Way of the Cross. And here, this is Temple Mount. Now, if you are to understand where the real city of David is, my friends, let me show it to you here for a second, just to understand. Here is Temple Mount. This here is Temple Mount. Real city of David, the biblical city of David, lies on top of a small hill south of Temple Mount, surrounded to you here by this red ellipse. If you are to understand where Mount Zion is, it's on the left side of the picture, really, really left up here, approximately 1,200 meters away. It's over 1 kilometer away from the biblical city of David. How is this so important? Let me show it to you again, just to be on the safe side. This here is where the priests and the noble people have lived in ancient Jerusalem. The city of David, biblical times, is down here on the right side, and the beautiful palace of King Herod is here. So who is the person who made that mistake that sends me back to that picture? That mistake, my friends, starts with Josephus, the famous Josephus Flavius, who is the historian of the 1st century AD. The 1st century AD, he is our most famous historian, which at the time writes that. He says, surely the beautiful palace of King Herod was built on top of the Jebusite fortress that was taken and conquered by King David at the time. And this was the place of the beautiful palace of King David prior to King Herod. Actually, Flavius, Josephus Flavius, believes that if King Herod must have built his palace on the top of the beautiful city of Jerusalem overlooking Temple Mount, surely that King David has done the same. The only thing he cannot imagine at the time, he cannot imagine that this actual city of David was so small. He could not perceive that because during his time, 1st century AD, Jerusalem was as large as all of this, my friends, all of that. He could have never believed that King David's city was so small just down here. I apologize for this yellow thing that you see. There's nothing we can do about it. It's a bug in the Zoom and the computer, so I can only apologize for it. Excuses for that. Which are the books by Josephus that we are relying upon? There are 2 books that I want to share with you, friends. One of them is called The Antiquities of the Jews, which is talking about the ancient times of the Jews from the times of Abraham all the way to the Roman period, when Josephus is actually telling his fellows, his Roman people, which is converted to Roman at the time, he's telling everything he knows to his fellows Romans about the Jews of the ancient times. This was 2,000 years ago. The second book, which is more important, is the story of the war of the Jews against the Romans. And in both of those amazing books, my friends, he's thoroughly describing the palace of King Herod as a magnificent piece of work, piece of art. He's thoroughly describing it with every single courtyard and halls and beautiful walls and the towers. Everything is thoroughly conducted and explained. And he's talking about the most magnificent building he has witnessed in the world. Again, ask me, do we have any more testimonials here? And let me show it to you, for instance, just for instance. So you're overlooking right now a beautiful, I would say, representation. This is like a replica, a representation done by archaeologists to what the palace of King Herod once looked like. Do we have any testimonials rather than Josephus himself? And let me be very specific as a historian, friends. Yes, we do. We have a testimony by a very famous Roman historian named Strabo, S-T-R-A-B-O, Strabo, or sometimes Strabon. He's a famous Greek Hellenistic, but a Roman citizen person at the time. And he's a senator. Not only he's a historian, but he's also a Roman senator who has been sent to Judea on a quest. He is going to Judea for, I would say, a thorough visit, including meetings in Judea. And when he comes back to Rome, he is standing on the preaching explanation, demo place in front of the whole Roman Senate, and he gives a speech. And he says, and I quote, "3 things have amazed me in the kingdom of Judea." He's talking about the kingdom of Judea ruled by King Herod. He's giving this in the introduction. He says, "I have witnessed an amazing lake, which is approximately 2 days hike from Jerusalem when you go down to the Judean desert. This lake was so magnificent that anything you throw inside doesn't sink, it floats." Of course, he's talking about the Dead Sea. The second thing he says, "I cannot figure out Jewish economy. How can they maintain such a successful economy in the kingdom of Judea if every 7th day is a day off? They don't work. Every 7th day, the whole world stops. Nothing moves, not even the asses and the donkeys and the bulls and the animals and the horses and the mules, nothing moves." He says, "God forbids, even their wives are not cooking on Saturday. I cannot figure out how can an economy work that way and so successful." And the third quote that he gives us, which is my interest here, is he says, "I have witnessed the most magnificent building in the whole world of that Roman time." And this is a Roman senator coming from great Rome to small province of Judea. And he's talking about the temple which King Herod built on the Temple Mount to have the tabernacle. This is the famous temple, if I may remind you. And he's talking about King Herod's, of course, palace and hospitality, but that's something else. So we have not only the witnessing and the testimonial of Josephus, famous historian, Jewish Roman historian, but we also have another testimony done by a very famous Roman historian who's not Jewish, and he's praising and talking highly of this. Now, before we enter that, let me give you a question mark just before we move on, friends. We're trying to understand Jerusalem of the time of Jesus. And we are actually dependent upon a very, I would say, well-known legacy and a great heritage that was introduced to us regarding the time of Jesus and the trial of Jesus, introduced to us by the monks of the Franciscan order from the 14th century. If I may be accurate here as a historian, I will give you some information in a few moments when we move on with the hypothesis that I'm about to introduce to you. But you need to understand that every document that we have so far supports the Via Dolorosa as we know it today, the way of the cross, with the 14 stations from the very famous school of Al-Umaria school, which is on the north part of Temple Mount, all the way to the Church of Holy Sepulchre and Resurrection, 14 stations of the cross. The first time they're ever mentioned in documentation, I will say this again, the first time they're ever mentioned in documents is on the second, third part of the 14th century AD. I need to make sure that we all understand that the 14th century AD is the time of the appearance of the Via Dolorosa and the 14 stations of the cross. We do not have any documentation supporting that this was existing before the 14th century. Now, if you know that, and if you have walked or at least have seen hiking and walking in the footsteps of Jesus along the Via Dolorosa, you understand that we have a hike that, if I may take you back here, this is the hike approximately, friends. This is Temple Mount. It starts here in the Antonia Fortress, and the walk is in this area where the Muslim quarter is until this area where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Resurrection is. This is the hike as we know it today, from east to west, following Jesus. If I would show it to you here, this would be from this area on the north part of Temple Mount here, and it walks like this within the Muslim quarter, like this, to the Church of Holy Sepulchre, which is here. This is the Church of Holy Sepulchre in this aerial picture that was taken from the air. Here, this is Church of Holy Sepulchre. So this is the hike as we know it today. But I'm about to challenge it with you, and please look over the ancient texts. I'm going to quote for you 3 different places in the New Testament, which are our Bible. Oh, as we know, this is our Bible. And this historical Bible is given to us actually in Greek. Let me remind you this. The actual stories are given to us in Greek because the most ancient copies that we have of the New Testament as we know them today in the world belongs to the time of Constantine the Great, the beginning of the Byzantine Empire. I know that we have ancient documents from the Judean scrolls. I really know very well that we have ancient texts and ancient scrolls and ancient parchments from Naj Hammadi in Egypt. I will not refer to these ancient texts within this specific lecture because this is another lecture that it would be my honor to give you. And if you want to compare ancient texts of New Testaments, but I will just say this right now. The ancient texts of the New Testament, which we rely upon as for now, are the ancient Greek origins from the time of Constantine the Great. And you need to remember that they were translated to all languages, including English. And the English is quite late. So I'm going to use the Neve version, as you see in the picture ahead of you right now. And this story, which you all know very well, comes from John 19. John 19. And if I read to you verse number 9, it says, and he went back inside the palace. It doesn't say the Antonia fortress. It doesn't say the tent of the soldiers. It doesn't say anything about a fort. It reflects to the palace and it refers to the palace. And there's a reason for that. The original word, as you know, was the praetorium. Praetorium in Greek, I will refer to in a minute, but the original word in Greek is praetorium. Now, that's John 19. Let's look over Luke 23, same version. We know that the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate, because Pilate at the time, the Roman procurator, is actually the one doing the trial in front of the palace, as I'm telling you right now. And I will refer to the documentation, which might suggest that this whole thing took place in King Herod's palace. I'm building up my hypothesis. Stay with me because it's going to be interesting. Now, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean when he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction. Yes, he was a Galilean, meaning he was under Herod's jurisdiction. He sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. So if the text suggests that the procurator of Rome, which is above King Herod, is in Jerusalem, and he sent Jesus, which was on trial, to Herod, where would you expect that thing to happen? Geographically speaking, you think over Jerusalem. Where would you expect this trial to take place? Now, in a minute, I want to send you somewhere else because there's another verse before I'm giving you some historical information. Still, we are now with the Holy Scriptures. Mark 15. Mark 15, friends, if I may show it to you right now, it says, the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace. That is the praetorium. Here, they even kept the word praetorium in the English text, meaning we have something quite amazing. We have at least 3 testimonials referring in the Holy Scriptures, 3 testimonies referring to the place of the trial. 2 of them do remind the palace, and the 3rd one is talking about King Herod. Where would you expect King Herod to be when in Jerusalem? Let me suggest, when the Queen of England comes to visit, let's say, one of its foreign colonies, let's say Canada, Australia, doesn't matter right now, would you send her to sleep in the YMCA? Would you send her to sleep in a camping site with the soldiers in the tents? No, she is the Queen of England, Her Majesty. The same goes with the Roman procurator, friends. When he comes to Jerusalem and he's coming from Caesarea, please bear in mind, Jerusalem at the Byzantine time is not the capital city. Jerusalem in the Roman times is not the capital city for the Romans. It was that way for the Jews, not for the Romans. The Romans are taking over this area from Caesarea, which was the place of the Roman procurator. When coming to Jerusalem for the Passover, he is a guest in the best suite available in Jerusalem. And the best hotel suite available, my friends, is not in the Roman Antonia fortress with the soldiers. He needs to have a proper bath. He needs to have a decent room and a decent bed and some decent food. And that goes for the idea that the whole hospitality of the procurator should have never been in the Antonia fortress. This was an idea suggested to us by the Franciscan monks in the 14th century, and I will give you the reason, historical reason in a minute, if I may. But the original ancient texts suggest, the Holy Scriptures themselves suggest that the Praetorium is actually where the palace is. And the whole Praetorium in front of the palace is like a simple shade or a pergola or something very simple like a hut which you built in front of the palace. Ask me, Shahar, do we have any other testimony to the idea of a trial taking place in front of the palace? And why do we talk about the Via Dolorosa? That way, let me please lead you away to the next stage of my hypothesis, if I may. This is what you're looking at right now, my friends, is a historical evidence of the existence of a trial in the palace of King Herod. Okay? This is an actual, I would say, stamp for the existence of such a trial in the ancient history of ancient Judea. Josephus Flavius writes in the book of the War of the Jews against the Romans, second book, chapter 14, and listen well to what I'm reading. At that night, Florus, my friends, is Gaius Florus, the Roman procurator from 64 to 66 AD. I put it down for you in the text so you know that. At that night, Florus slept in the palace. That makes sense. When the Roman procurator comes to Jerusalem, he sleeps over in the best suite available, which is the Roman palace of King Herod. That is the best place. Now I continue. The next morning, a platform was established in front of the palace, and he sat on it for the trial. Thinking of the word pergola, a hut, a shade, praetorium, my friends, you're actually looking at a text which describes the idea of what this praetorium should be dealt with to begin with. So if we have these kind of testimonies that ancient times in Judea, trials for all kinds of criminals, outlaws, and others could have been done by the Roman procurator in the front stage of the palace of King Herod, why do we think that the Via Dolorosa should start from the Antonia fortress? Now, I imagine that one of you is asking me, Shahar, so how come, why did we go to the Antonia fortress? Who initiated that idea? And the answer, my friends, is, I would say, as simple as that. Please put away everything we spoke so far and start a new role with me. Think of a telenovela. My camera A is resting for a moment. I'm opening camera B for 2 minutes, if I may, of your time, 2 minutes to understand a historical research which we have conducted in Jerusalem to give an answer to the question I just gave you right now. What is happening in the 14th century AD in Jerusalem that would initiate the need for the Franciscans to set a foot within the Muslim quarter and to set the Via Dolorosa where that is right now? And the reason, my friends, is as simple as that. In the 14th century AD, the Mamluks, the famous Muslim rulers of Jerusalem at the time, the Mamluks are starting to build the Muslim quarter as we know it today. Meaning, if you're looking where Jerusalem is divided to Jews, Christians, Armenians, and Muslims, actually, this division starts in the Mamluk times in the 14th century. Now, this is the time of the setting of the four quarters as we know them today. They are starting to build heavily and I would say intensively building the Muslim quarter. The Pope was very much upset because it has become a huge problem to different pilgrims who are coming from Europe at the time to actually make a path and walk through the Muslim quarter in a safe way when they walk from the Mount of Olives to the Church of Holy Sepulchre. So the Pope is sending his best troops available. Which are his best troops? That is the Franciscan order. The Franciscan order at the time was formatted and formulated, and they are called the Custodia di Terra Santa. The Custodia di Terra Santa meaning the guards of the Holy Land. They are sent to Jerusalem to buy and purchase land. And anywhere they purchase lands, they start sanctified. So different procedures of sanctification and holying sites is starting in the 14th century. Every new site they purchase, we are talking real estate, simply real estate in Jerusalem, is going through sanctification. And that sanctification is extremely important because a story is attached to every place. And every sanctification starts to get a story next to it. But if you are looking at Byzantine ancient documents, if you're looking at Crusaders' time documents, you may see that the Via Dolorosa, the way of the cross, was suggested on a different route in Jerusalem. The routes were different. They did not follow the route which we follow today from the Antonia fortress. And that brings us back to the idea that the trial itself was never to begin with in the first station north of Temple Mount. It was actually by the Jaffa Gate today, where King Herod's palace is, on the most well-known, famous civilian site of Jerusalem at the time. I'm saying civilian because the Temple Mount was too holy to make trials on. Temple Mount was, I would say, the core, but it wasn't for trials. It was only meant to work the Lord's. But if you're going for civilian needs, like a trial, for instance, then King Herod's palace would be suffice for that, would be very fit for that idea. So if I'm summing up my hypothesis so far, we have documentations that allows us to understand that trials could have been taking place in King Herod's sites. I'm talking about the palace, of course. We have 3 testimonials from the Holy Scriptures, from John, Mark, and Luke, suggesting that the trial was related to the site of King Herod, not to mention vividly the palace itself. And we have a document that gives us the idea of why is the Via Dolorosa today walking from where it is today. I just dedicated a few moments to understand why do we have that historical understanding that the heritage and the legacy is recruiting the path of today. And I gave you right now the reasoning for that, historical reasoning for why do we walk today on the route starting in the Antonia fortress. Now, if I may, let me invite you in. When you understand all of the above, everything I built up so far in the introduction to the subject is actually meant to take you with me right now to literally dive into the pools of King Herod's palace in the beautiful site of the, I would say, the Tower of David Museum. But this is actually King Herod's site. King Herod's palace is actually buried under the Tower of David Museum, friends. And what you're overlooking right now are people walking down the stairs to those magnificent pools, which I showed you in this beautiful picture. These are the ancient pools in a replica. These are the authentic pools, which we are in a very small part of. You need to eliminate these walls, my friends. These walls here on the right side are Crusaders period fortress built into the King Herod's pools. They never knew anything about the King Herod's palace. They didn't care about that. They built their towers in order to defend Jerusalem at the time. And you walk from these stairs here. You see these people walking up the stairs here? You walk and you follow here where the light takes you between the towers. And let's continue and I'll show you where. We walk from this area. This is the moat. This is the moat that is surrounding King Herod's palace, or today's the Museum of the Tower of David. And it will lead you to where I'm aiming right now. Oh, sorry. I have another picture of the pools at wintertime. So it's beautiful to see how they were filled with water. But actually, I'm dedicated to take you here right now. This area, friends, is the famous area of excavations, which I'm interested in showing you right now. These excavations are magnificent. They are actually giving us the best option, if I may say, to dive into King Herod's palace, to the remains of the systems of the water, underground water systems of King Herod's palace, some ancient floors from different places. And we are talking about a palace which was huge at the time. Huge, that means 350 meters long. That is third of a kilometer. Imagine this. This is how long it was, upon approximately 150 meters wide. It's a huge territory for a palace, especially when you talk about the 2,000 years old palace. And you can actually walk in here today into this site, which is known here in the name Kishle. Kishle, for those who are afraid of the word, please do not be afraid. This is only a Turkish word for jail. This place was serving as a jail, but we had to unearth it, completely unearth it, and take all the soil outside in order to get down to King Herod's palace. Huge amounts of lanterns, pottery, King Herod's coins, arrowheads from the Second Temple period. Everything that came out of this amazing excavation represents the time of Jesus, my friends. Half a shekel coins from the time of Jesus. This is the famous annual tax that every Jewish man above the age of 20 carried in his pocket when coming to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage of the three holy holidays, famous Jewish holidays, tabernacle, and of course, the rest of the famous holidays. This beautiful pictures shows you how this looks today. It looks very much like a church, but it was not meant to be that way, friends. This upper part, the ceiling here, is actually the ceiling of a jail. If you have good eyes, you can even spot the bars on the ceiling. Look at the ceiling and you see some spots. These spots are actually cotton bars made of metal that once served as the jail, of course, cells. The cells of jail, because everyone was prisoners here. So you're actually overlooking right now a magnificent excavation which can take you and lead you into the ancient place of what we believe to be the place of the trial of Jesus, which I gave you all the needed explanations of why should we be looking for the beautiful palace of King Herod. If I may sum up my explanation before we take some questions and I let Sharon Bershatsky, sum it up for us. Please take a good close look at the Second Temple Jerusalem model of the time. What you're looking at on the right side, this would give you, by the way, topography as well, because when the pictures were shown before, it was only 2 dimensions. Here you can have 3 dimensions. You can actually see that this area is lower. This is the biblical city of David. The beginning of the ancient idea, the mistaken idea of Josephus, my friends, was because he could not understand how can such a great king, such as King David, be in the downtown here, in the lower city. He could not have imagined that this very small hill, In his time, this is a very small hill. Is actually the biblical city of David, which is scattered upon a very small 10 acres land. That's it, small 10 acres here. This Temple Mount is a huge area, and the western part of the city, this whole area was built mainly in the time of Second Temple period, coming to a great peak in the time of King Herod. King Herod's palace is here. This is the area where King Herod's palace is, this area. And he could never imagine that this was the actual city of David. Now, if you take the trial of Jesus to this area, my friends, it means that we should be looking for the path itself to walk with our pilgrims, with pastors and chaplains and reverends and fathers and all clergy. We should be walking actually from this area here, from the palace of King Herod, the Tower of David Museum, which is here. We should be walking this way here to the Church of Holy Sepulchre and Resurrection, not from that Temple Mount. So if I just sum up, I gave you right now the reasoning for the existing Via Dolorosa today, the story of the Franciscan monks as the troops of the Pope coming to the ancient land of Israel some 600 years ago in the 14th century AD to purchase land to maintain the open path for the Christian pilgrims between the Temple Mount and Mount of Olives and Church of Holy Sepulchre. Now you understand that. I gave you the Holy Scriptures, testimonials from the ancient times, referring to what we know as the Praetorium, which I suggest is not within the Antonia fortress, but within the king's palace of the Second Temple period of Jesus' times. And I gave you some other documentations and ideas putting geography of where it should be. So now we have an idea of the trial of Jesus in its original geography, which is related to the times of Jesus in ancient Jerusalem some 2,000 years ago. I rest my case, my friends, and I will hand over the microphone, if I may, to Ron and Sharon, who will continue running our story together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shahar. We are still waiting for questions. Usually it takes people time to, take in everything Shahar is saying and ask questions. We're used to it. So take your time, we're here. If anyone wants to ask something, Shahar is on our service. He's from the good guys. So,
in the meantime, perhaps we can pass to Josh before any questions are asked. And then you, Josh, you can come back to me when you're finished. Unmute.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Josh.
Sharon, do you have I think I sent you a slide, didn't I, that you were going to put on the screen for us?
Yes, this is the moment. I'll do that. And in the meantime, I will ask Shahar one question we just received from Brian. Is there a practical route to walk today on your proposed route, Shahar?
So thank you very much for the question. Of course, this is a new idea and the route is not yet ready. I mean, people can actually walk it. You can come to the Tower of David Museum. You can start your tour there by understanding this and reading from the New Testament with your clergy. And then you can simply walk through the Christian quarter. But that would be very interesting, friends, because that means that the whole Via Dolorosa is actually within the borders of the Christian quarter today, which I believe is very easy and well done, arranged for Christian pilgrims, because your whole tour would be actually in between the Tower of David Museum and the Church of Holy Sepulchre and Resurrection, which is within the Christian quarter. So you can actually walk from 2 or 3 different streets today on ground.
Perfect. Let's see if there's anything else. Not at the moment. סרחיו, אם אתה שומע אותי, אני מנסה לשתף מסך.
כן, אני בדיוק ניסיתי לכתוב לך. למטה יש לך share screen בירוק עם חץ. אז תלחצי על זה. מצאת את זה?
כן, אבל אני לא מוצאת את ה...
ואז זה פותח לך את המחשב שלך.
כן, אבל ספציפית הדבר הזה זה לא פותח, זה PDF.
Ladies and gentlemen, one moment, please.
אז תפתחי את ה-PDF,
רון, ה-PDF חייב להיות פתוח על הדסק.
ואחר כך תעשי את השיתוף של ה-PDF.
זה מה שעשיתי.
אבל תפתחי את ה-PDF בבראוזר.
על הדסקטופ, תפתחי אותו.
תפתחי אותו על הדסקטופ בבראוזר כלשהו. בכרום או ב-Edge.
הבנתי. רק שנייה. Ron, could you ask the further questions while we're opening this file?
Yes, Shahar, just getting a question. And it is, was the Crusaders identified Herod Palace, or palace as David's palace, or was it just Josephus?
Well, that's interesting because we had the same question on the last seminar, if you remember. Actually, everybody knows about the Crusaders, but they're not the first one to start that. If I may be accurate, my friends, the first question mark was actually by Josephus. He's the first one to make that mistake. Followed by him was a very famous Byzantine pilgrim, which we know him as the Voyager of Bordeaux. He came to ancient land of Judea at the year 333 AD. From his time and on, every pilgrim in the Byzantine era, in the Muslim period, and then on in the Crusaders period, is following that mistake. I'm talking about more than 2,000 testimonials, more than 2,000 that I went over in my PhD to understand who goes where. They actually followed one after another, and they went on the wrong side because they never believed that the city of David might have been on the southern hill, south of Temple Mount. So they just followed the earlier mistake. The first one to identify the real city of David and to separate it from the Tower of David, the first one to separate that was a very Scottish great scholar, and a very interesting one named George Adam Smith. He did so in 1900. And on his amazing book, which was dedicated to Jerusalem, it was a guidebook to Jerusalem that he published in 1907, is the first one to write down the idea that the Gihon spring is actually the fountain of the Virgin. And the city of David is actually downhill and not uphill as suggested until his time. So the Crusaders were just a link on the chain in many other mistakes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. You previously answered the question from Brian Talbot about the practical route to walk today. We have another question from Alistair Gibson, who's asking, will this replace the Via Dolorosa, do you think?
I find it very hard to believe that it would take that easy because in the Catholic Church, my friends, a dogma is a dogma, and you know that. And when the Pope suggests something, especially through his pioneers of the Franciscan order, this is not something a historian can change. Even if I have history with me, this is not going to change easily. But if I may be very prophetic about it, a lot of evangelical churches, Protestant churches, Anglican churches, and open-minded churches about science are adopting this idea, and they come to visit the new site because it gives them a new idea of where it should have been. I'm not saying they walk a new Via Dolorosa. I'm saying they start to visit this unique spot and to read from the New Testament, because this is a very historical accuracy that this should have been the site. But to be a prophetic about a new Via Dolorosa, that is above my pay grade.
Thank you very much indeed. We have one last question from Paul Campion. What is the historical reason for the marks on the pavement in the underground area of the Antonio Fortress?
I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar with it enough, so I do not know about those marks. I don't know who made them. Sorry, not my specialty. I don't want to say nonsense. I apologize.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much indeed, Shahar. Much appreciated. A wonderful lecture. I'm now going to pass you through finally to Josh from Travelink. Josh?
Yep. Yeah, once again, a big thank you to Shahar for that presentation. That was really excellent. On the screen here, you can see obviously our contact details. We do have a number of tours operating from the autumn onwards, which we fully believe should go ahead as originally planned, and certainly from 2021 onwards as well. So I'd encourage you all to check out the website, www.toursforchristians.com. Here you can do a wide range of itineraries for tours in the Holy Land, and it will have the prices and all the information required, such as flight details, hotels, and anything else. If you're interested in leading a group tour yourself, or you're just interested in touring, or you have any questions about the Holy Land, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. You know, either give me a phone call or send me an email. You've got my email address there on the screen. And you know, just from today's webinar, I'd also love people to either give me a call or an email about today's webinar, just giving some general feedback. If it's something that you've enjoyed, you know, I'm sure if we get a large number of positive responses, we will run a similar event very soon. And finally, I'd just like to finish by saying, may the Lord bless you, may the Lord keep you, may the Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you, turn his face towards you, and give you peace. Amen.
Thank you very much indeed, Josh. Much appreciated. On behalf of the Israel Ministry of Tourism and Traveling Together, we thank everyone. Please keep an eye on the Traveling Tours for Christian website for any further webinars. Shahar, thank you very much for your time. It is much appreciated. Sharon, thank you as well. Very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good afternoon and thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. We will send the recording in the following days. Have a